The F-80C-10 Shooting Star is an entry-level jet fighter in the American air tree. Let's check it out. So, as most of you know, in the most recent patch, Gaijin enabled super high resolution textures and generally cranked up the visuals when you set your graphics to ultra. Well, for this review, I'm going to go the opposite route as an experiment and drop down to ultra low. There we go. Anyway, the F-80 Shooting Star actually started life as the P-80. This was the second American-designed jet fighter and the first successful one, which first flew in 1944, being introduced just before the end of World War II. The development work was kept top secret, so much so that only a small fraction of the engineers and staff working on the project actually knew that they were building a jet fighter. The test program ended up being quite dangerous, with several test pilots killed or injured. The first batch of Shooting Stars entered service at the end of 1944, and two of the prototypes were sent to Italy and flew some recon missions, but never found any combat, and aviation historians argue to this day if the P-80 should be considered operational during World War II. The P-80 was eventually renamed to the F-80, and ended up seeing extensive combat during the Korean War, and earned the dubious distinction of being the first jet fighter to be shot down by another jet fighter, in November of 1950, when a MiG-15 brought one of them down. Well, the F-80 eventually redeemed itself, being the first American jet to shoot down a MiG-15 a short while later, so there's that. The F-80 eventually went on to fly with about half a dozen countries, some of them remaining in service all the way into the early 1970s. What we have in War Thunder are a few different planes, but today we're looking at the F-80C-10 Shooting Star, in Rank 5 at Battle Rating 7.7. The primary armament is a set of 6 50 caliber machine guns with some pretty basic ammo belt options. This is going to be a very familiar weapon setup to American tech tree players, so no big surprises getting into the F-80. As with all machine gun loadouts at the higher tiers, sometimes you're going to need a fair amount of time on target to bring things down, but you've got plenty ammo to work with, so, definitely no problems with that. For external weapons, you get a couple of options. 2 dumb bombs, or 8 unguided rockets. There's no ballistics computer or anything, so you're tossing bombs blindly and firing rockets, aiming more with luck than skill. The good news is that the bombs you take are 1,000-pounders, which are pretty good hitters. So if you get an accurate drop, they'll do some respectable damage. The flight performance of the F-80 really comes down to an important question. Do you have the hydraulic boosters yet? If you don't, you'll likely find the plane very sluggish in maneuvers and getting danced on by almost everything else at its BR. With the boosters, it's often more of a fair fight, but there's still a good number of other fighters that can outturn the F-80 in this BR range. So really, it's just going to come down to practice and experience, knowing what's safe to engage and what isn't. Also, the plane has a very noteworthy limitation. Only about a minute and a half of WEP for the engine. The reason for this is that the F-80 doesn't have any kind of an afterburner, but it does have a water injection system, which uses an internal water tank to provide extra cooling and give the engines a slight boost. But the plane runs out of that water, so only about 90 seconds or so of WEP. Make sure you're very careful in how you use it. Flying the F-80C out into combat missions can be either glorious or frustrating. If you get down-tiered, you'll be able to use the plane's good climb rate to set up some pretty effective boom and zoom tactics. If you get up-tiered, it's gonna be a pretty bad day. The F-80 is a serious victim of the game's power creep, and it's completely outclassed by almost every jet above its battle rating. I've had the best luck in up-tier matches, trying to stay with the pack as best as I can, and avoid being singled out by enemy jets with better climb performance. If you're one of, say, 6 or 7 people in a furball, it's going to be a lot harder for someone to zoom in and pick you out individually without exposing themselves to your teammates. So, teamwork and group tactics end up being essential in a plane like this that doesn't really have anything else to fall back on in at least half of the matches that you'll end up in with the plane. Now, for ground attack and close air support, well, no ballistics computer and very limited weapons. The 1,000-pounders hit hard, but are difficult to hit with, so it's a trade-off. The rockets, again, inaccurate and hard to get hits with, so it really comes down more to luck than anything else. You can use its generous supply of machine gun ammo to attack soft targets in air battles, like the AI-controlled AAA that guards the strategic bases and stuff, but in ground battle close air support, the plane struggles pretty bad more often than not. Visually, if I'm being honest, I've never really liked the look of the F-80C, or really any of the F-80 versions. To me, this plane just looks like a hot dog with wings. Some folks will like it, but I never have. You really don't get any interesting paint jobs or anything either, so this one gets low marks for me for its visuals. Now, landing this plane isn't too bad, but you're going to have to remember that this is a first-generation jet, and its engine response is pretty weak and pretty slow. Keep the throttle up on landing until you touch down, otherwise you're at a pretty good risk of approach stalls, and nobody likes that. Now, the cockpit has relatively good visibility in most directions, but the instrument layout can be a little weird. For me, the instruments aren't especially visually distinct, and flying out in VR, I had a hard time checking my console with a quick glance instead of needing to stare and search with my eyeballs, so I considered that a bit of a disadvantage. To close out on the F-80C-10, this jet has tons of ammo for its guns, and it has a reasonably good rate of climb for a low-tier jet fighter. However, it's pretty slow for a jet, and it's not especially maneuverable in most situations, and it only gets a minute and a half of web. The final verdict on the F-80C-10 is that this plane is a serious victim of power creep and BR compression. You have a 50-50 chance of being in a good match where you can be competitive, or of getting up-tiered and totally outclassed by everything else in the air. If this is one of your first jets, you'll be flying it a lot, but once you graduate past it in the tech tree, you probably won't ever come back. As always, thanks for watching.